It's time to put safety first, so let's build some hand guards for the router table. There are two different types shown in the guide. The router bit guard seems pretty simple, however the freehand guard seems overly complicated. So I'm just going to make a short and long version of the bit guard. I've got some red gun that's the right size, so what I'm going to do is make one back piece and then use the table saw to cut this in half, and I'll end up with two back pieces. Sounds easy enough. So I start off with marking out the location for the slots at each end of the piece. I'm going to drill the slot out at 8mm spacings and then chisel the remaining waste, hence why I have the blue tape on the ruler. With all of them marked out, I punch all of those with a screw and then proceed to drill them using the drill press. Next up, I clamp the piece to the table and start chiseling out the waste. Now, this was going quite well until the wood decided to split and separate at the end. You can imagine my frustration here. Thankfully, I hadn't already completed the other slot, otherwise I would have been properly mad. So, after having a break to clear my head, I've decided to use plywood instead for the back piece. I've got some 1/2" plywood I can use, and I'm going to stick them together with double-sided tape so I can make two pieces at the same time. I do all these steps again of marking the slot locations, drilling the holes, and then chiseling out the waste. With all of that done, I give the slots a clean up using a file to clean out any chisel marks. While the pieces are still joined together, I mark out some round corners and then roughly cut off the wastes on all 4 of the corners. I'll be rounding these off with my belt sander shortly. Before that though, I'm going to prepare the perspex for the guards now, as I'll be using the sander to also round the corners. I'm going to use the inside circle of my roll of blue tape as the size of the rounded edge, which is 3 inches. I've got a scrap piece of perspex that I'll be trimming down to that width, so I mark it out. It's a long enough piece for both the short and long guards I'm making, so I use the tape roll as a guide and mark out the rounded edges on both ends of the perspex. I also mark out the cut mark for the ends of the pieces and mark out the waste areas too. With that done, I get the table saw out and trim the perspex down to the 3-inch width I need. Before I cut them to length, I'm going to use my coping saw to cut the waste from the round edges first. It's easy to clamp one large piece, as a smaller piece would be difficult to easily clamp. Now it's time for some belt sander action. These types of jobs are the exact reason why I purchased this sander, as it makes it easy to remove waste and shape wood with minimal fuss. I start off with the perspex, and in no time I have 2 nicely rounded ends. Next up is the backing pieces, and these are just as easy to round off using the belt sander, and in no time I'm done. Now that the guard pieces are rounded, I put them on the table saw miter sled and cut them down to size. After this, it's time to give the back pieces a sanding, starting off with the outer edges and faces, before separating the 2 pieces and then sanding the inside faces. It's time to attach the perspex pieces to the back pieces, so I start off by marking out the hole locations on the piece that still has the protective paper attached. I find a pack of screws in my screw box, determine which drill bit to use that matches the shank, and then drill the holes in the larger piece. I then tape the smaller guard to this one and use these holes as pilot holes to drill out the holes on the smaller guard. I then tape the guard to the backing piece and drill the holes into the backing piece, repeating this process with both backing pieces. Next is to create the countersunk holes for the screws, and once this is done, I re-drill the holes in the guard pieces to match the overall width of the screws so they can just slide through. And now they do, I can see that the countersunk holes need to be a little bit deeper. With all that done, I finish off the backing pieces by rounding off the edges and then give them a good blast with the air compressor to remove all of the dust. I'm finishing off these backing pieces by giving them 3 coats of the satin finish I use for the router table legs. A couple of days later, after the satin finish is dried, it's time to put them together and see how they look on the router table. I'm starting off with the small guard first. The screws fit nicely to the guard and hold it firmly in place. I then grab the T-track bolts and put them through the slots in the backing piece and use the threaded knobs to hold them in place. I can now slide this guard into the T-track on the fence and adjust it to the required height of the job I'm doing, and you can see how it would prevent my fingers from brushing past the router bit accidentally. I put together the larger freehand guard, and you can see here it allows the guard to sit above the router bit when the fence is further away. And you can see here how I can be doing some freehand rounding, and my fingers would also be protected once again from accidentally brushing past the router bit. And there we have it, folks, 2 safety accessories for the router table, and I'm one step closer to being finished. All that remains now is making a featherboard and a safety power switch. Stay tuned to the next video where I build the featherboard. Until next time, bye!